Oh, cool. Thanks, Billy. It is good to see most everybody here at Zoom land. We don't always have to be on camera. So for those that I can see, hello, and I'm waving at you. Those that I can't, I'm glad you're here. It's been a lot these last few days. I think where I would start is just super proud of our group. Um, the amount of conversations and debates and long nights that we had this past week, and just our ability to dialogue was really helpful and was really good for us. And obviously, because everyone's all thinking or wondering or asking themselves the same things, we didn't do anything to this deadline. And for us, what we really wanted to lean into was continued focus on our process, continued focus on development. And with any sort of concept that came in, it's not just the short-term results or the short-term goals, I should say, that we're interested in. It's the long-term. So with anything, understanding the second and third and fourth order consequences is very, very important to us, because as we're navigating, this league, this space, new cap environment, particular contracts, like all the things, and considering all things, there is a lot of nuances and complexities that go into that, as well as the guardrails, or the guardrails that we call them, of our own DNA, like what is important for us. So if you take the sheer number of opportunities, that will get shrunk into less and less just by who we are, what we stand for, things that we're interested in, not just in the short term, but in the long term as well. And it ultimately landed us with not doing anything. And I think another part of this whole equation, which is not the biggest factor as to why we didn't do anything, but there are certain games of the last few weeks that have been really important for us, and not just our team, but like individuals, right? Like we've seen an uptick with Onyeka, we've seen an uptick with Jalen Johnson, we've seen an uptick with Zeke Bay, and I can go right down the line, even down to College Park, where Kobe Buffkin is developing extremely well in that environment, and that's really important for our process. As I made known, just with like how Jalen has come up in that, and that's something that for us long term is always going to be an important tool on how our guys develop. So, all things considered, yeah, we ultimately decided that we weren't going to do anything. Could we have done something? Absolutely, but that would have been short-term results that we didn't feel were going to benefit us for the long term. And that's where we stand here today. So with that opening, I'll obviously open it up to any questions you may have further.
We'll begin with Lauren Williams.
Hey Landry, just curious as far as the goals that you guys had coming in, which has been to build good habits and make sure that guys are playing unselfishly, things that are going to be long-term things that help you guys to be a championship team. I'm curious what kind of benchmarks you guys have kind of put in place now, to kind of say, okay, when we reach X goal, we'll make this move. When we reach this, we'll do that.
Yeah, it's a good question. So part of that, kind of baked into your question, is the science of it. It's the measurements. It's the things that we value at the end of the day. Some of that stuff is tangible, some of it is intangible, right? Like we talk a lot about having a competitive spirit. We talk a lot about being unselfish, being connected and unified, loving your craft and owning it. Like those are things that have certain indicators that you can evaluate. They're a little harder to measure for certain. But when we see, kind of in my opening statement, when you start to see some of those first fruits of it, it's exciting. Watching Onyeka the last few games has been really important for us, just to see how he's able to switch out on a Jason Tatum and show some defensive versatility and show the aggression to go get those boards. Like that all matters to us. And like you can measure those particular instances for certain, right? Like, did it result in a contested shot? Not always. Like some players are just so dang good that you can do everything you can and they make shots. So you never want to get caught up in resulting. But you do want to see all the actions that are prior to that, where if you were to look at them over a long period of time, you'd be net positive. And so having that approach, it takes one patience, which is, I know is tough for everybody in any endeavor. But it also takes continuous improvement for those particular things. So that's where, again, you're weighing the long term and the short term, and we're watching, well, what does this trajectory look like right now off of those types of evaluations? And I think we'll know, like we'll know when it's time to move on from players, and we know when it's time to bring in somebody new. But obviously, right now, that wasn't the time. This was not the time.
And that being said, I mean, we've kind of seen this team have players that have been rumored to be in the trade deadline in the past, and you've held on to them for multitudes of reasonings, whether that's you hope that their value will go up over time, or as you mentioned, it's just not the right move at the time. But with DeJounte, I'm curious, how do you guys find that balance of maybe hoping that, you know, his value could go up over time or he fits in the long-term plan? How do you balance those two things?
Another good question. I'm less interested in maximizing just a player's value in order to make a move for a different player. Like that is a part of any sports business, and I certainly understand that, but that's also kind of not totally in your control, right? Like if a player goes down on injury, something significant, you know, like what does that do for a player's value? Like that to me is not as important as, okay, placing a value on going to a DeJounte or a Jalen or a Trae Young and saying, hey, here are the areas in which we can continuously improve upon. Value and all that stuff, that'll take care of itself. What comes before that is like, well, what are you doing to enhance value, or what are you not doing to not enhance your value? But we're more interested in like the process of daily habits, which we've been, you know, we've talked before on this very thing. Like to me, having that as a huge focal point, results will take care of themselves in that. And maybe not, you may not see it right away, but again, the trajectory over a long haul, I'm willing to bet that we would be net positive and we would see a more sustainable model of that particular thing. And I'm more interested in that than I am in just the immediate, like quick, let's just grab for anything talent wise and try to make a play. You know, like you're going to need talent in this league. I'm fully aware of that. But at the same time, growing from within is really important because that gives us, that it just gives us a great way. And you know, as you look over in time and you look at across sports at great organizations, they grow from within, and there's a particular DNA structure that they have for that. And that I am much more interested in than short-term things. But that requires patience. It really does. I'm right there with you. Sometimes I walk in, I'm like, wish we were further than we are, but you know what? We've made the guardrails. We have everyone that's bought in. And sometimes like we'll get to a point where, yeah, you got to make changes. But again, wasn't the time to do it at this point.
So I guess when you look at this roster construction, who would you say that this roster is maybe constructed around, and how do you continue to build around them?
So this roster is more constructed around the things that we feel are important rather than any one particular player.
We'll go to Zach Klein next.
Hey, Landry, appreciate you, man. In talking to a bunch of guys around the league, they said that you and your front office staff had a lot of deals on the table, but these deals were definitely it favored the opposition because they were hoping to take advantage of the perceived youth and inexperience of this front office staff. How much did you guys learn through this process? And maybe the best move was no move at all. And, you know, it's about being patient when, you know, the expectation is to make a move, but again, to stick to your core values and not be, I guess, as someone told me, just the vultures are out and they were trying to attack.
That's brilliant. I can't speak for other teams and their perceived value of things, or am I going to sit here and judge another team on what they present as if that's some indictment on us as a front office and our perceived youth and inexperience, whatever that may be. Were there deals on the table that we said no to? Absolutely, because for us it just didn't make sense for what we're valuing, and what we're after from our long-term vision. And like that's ultimately where we landed. I wasn't going to sit here and get caught up in that game if that was even a game to begin with. So that's interesting though.
Yeah, it's just to follow up about, yeah, again, it gets to the point of sticking to the core values and not taking a deal just to make a deal's sake and make, the fan or, other members just happy just for, for deal's sake, so to speak.
Yeah, no, sorry, what was the question there?
Just how important and how hard is it to stick to those core values and not make a move when there's pressure and expectation to do such things?
Oh yeah. I think it just takes a lot of belief in what you're doing. And if it was me alone, it would be hard. Like I'm only one human and I'm finite. But when you have a group that galvanizes around and buys into that vision, when there are things that come in, you don't have that internal discord at that. Like I've already set, this is what it means to be a Hawk. This is what's important. So anything that comes in, that needs to be run through that filter. And everyone that has bought into that filter, they are here to help in that particular moment. Because yes, there's going to be pressures from all kinds and of various different sources. But at the end of the day, like we can only be who we can be. And the mistake would be not knowing who you are, what you stand for. And if you truly stand for those things, then yeah, it's going to require really hard conversations. Really hard. Yeah, well, conversations first and foremost, but then secondarily, hard decisions. And sometimes there's decisions in what you do and what you don't do. And that's where I leaned into that. And I'm grateful that I have such a supportive staff around me. I'm grateful that me and Quinn and Tony are all aligned in who we are and what it is that we want to do, as well as everyone else from Kyle to our head of analytics and Dwight. I mean, like I can go right down the line, where our alignment on who we are and what we value is really important. So,
thank you.
We'll go to Charles Odom.
Thank you. Obviously, every team deals with injuries, but to what extent did injuries this season with DeAndre and Jalen impact your ability to make conclusions about this roster construction, and how did that possibly impact decisions you made at trade deadline?
Yeah, it's a part of it. To your point, injuries are always going to be a part of things. They're not always in your control, and a lot of times you spend your energies on preventative measures and placing a value on things that you avoid, but it's always hard to judge the value on things that you avoid because you never know like what you ultimately avoid at the end of the day. And I mean, yeah, it's a part of it because you're looking at really important players that are valuable and the impact that they can have on the game. So when they're not there, then it kind of becomes this whole evaluation process. But what is helpful for us is how you do anything is how you do everything. And if you are injured, like, well, how are you attacking your rehab, right? It's the same thing as, well, how are you attacking your game on the court? Those things that come before the results that we're looking for are the focus. Those, when you get those right, again, to Lauren, what we talked about earlier, that is exactly what it is that we're focused on. So those things are going to matter regardless of the circumstances that you find yourself in, because those are consistent. How do you operate in moments of adversity or suffering, or things that we're going to place value in? So to us, as far as it relates to our roster construction, I don't think it was as heavy of an impact as some may think. But I do understand you need good players out there to win ball games. So that was an unfortunate part about that. But for us, we don't want to waste that moment either, and make sure that we're diligently working and helping those particular players through those circumstances that they're in.
Just a quick follow. How is that related also to the mention you made earlier to recent gains, as you've only recently had opportunities to see DeAndre and Jalen together?
Yeah, I like you see some of those games, and it's not a great sample size on the season. But there's enough there where you go, oh, that's exciting. Like, can we explore that further? What would that look like over 20, 40, 50 games? And then at that point, make a call. Like the good news is we have guys that are under contract that give us that runway of evaluation, in order for us to have a large enough sample size to then make an informed decision on what we're doing.
Allison?
Hey, Landry, when you're talking about the long-term goal, how much do you evaluate getting into the playoffs just beyond the play-in with this group? And does it put more pressure on you when it even just comes in the summer on maybe making bigger moves if you don't get to where you want to get to in the playoffs?
Yes. I'm sorry if I sound like a broken record. It's a really good, it's a good question. We would love to go as far as we possibly can in any given season. I'd be particularly interested in, well, how did we get there? Right? Like, how much can you rely on luck in that particular moment? I don't want to get caught up in a term that I used before, resulting, right? Like, if you win 10 games in a row, does that make you a great team? Not necessarily. If you lose 10 games in a row, does that make you a bad team? Not necessarily. What was it that ultimately led to us being in a position of the playoffs, of the second round, of the conference finals, of the finals, right? Like, that's really important for us. And that takes a lot of deep dives. And I think that that's really important for us to make sure where, let's say, like, if we are a playoff team, that evaluation is going to be crucial. We're going to have to look at, well, why were we quote unquote successful right now? Were they habits that led to those results? Awesome. Let's continue on with that. Were they poor habits and now all of a sudden we're just finding ourselves because other teams got injured? Well, that's a tough call for us. Now we have to look at the sample size that we have before going into any point in time where you're looking to make changes on your team, and then make that decision based off of what you have.
And just real quick, when you mention long-term, like, what is the definition of long-term? Is it 1, 2, 3 seasons until you can really say, like, you found success in the group that you have or need to make changes?
For me, anytime you talk about long-term, it's just talking about, do you have a big enough sample size based off what that is? There are certain measurements in any analytics model that will tell you, okay, 100, 200, 300, 400 possessions of anything, like, that's a big enough sample size for you to make an informed decision on that. To get caught up in 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, it is hard to say. I'll just be honest. I can't sit here and say, hey, in 3 years, it's going to be this, like that. I don't want to lie to you. And I don't want to, that's a bad setup too. It's more like, okay, for where we ultimately want to go, what kind of sample size do we have for that?
Ken Segura?
Right, Landry, thanks for your time. Sample size brings us a good question here. I think there's been obviously a lot of talk and thought about our Trey and DeJounte working well together. The numbers would suggest that when they're on the floor together, you're not as good a team. On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that this pairing is going to work and lead to where do you guys want to go as a franchise?
It's a really good question. And I love how you framed it. Like, sample size is getting larger and larger and larger. And assuming you're looking at specific lineups and defensive and offensive ratings, which can always be debated as well. Yeah, you're starting to see that more and more. And yeah, I can't lie to you. The numbers speak for themselves on that. But we're also interested in, well, let's say they're on the court together and it's based off the numbers, it's not working out. Well, why is that? Like, what are things that we can do for them in a development aspect to make it look more like the on-off lineups that I'm assuming that you're looking at? And ultimately, like that, then that lays something that is measurable. Those are things now from a development standpoint that you can look at and say, okay, can you progress in these areas? If you can't, then yeah, like those are times like that. I'm not saying that's exactly how it's going to happen with any player, where you'd have to consider the changes that, everyone would then be kind of asking and looking for at the end of the day.
To follow up on that, are you saying, like, is there something that you see or know, like, if we get this kind of piece, then this will work better? Or, I mean, kind of what is your thinking at this point about what's going to make this work?
Piece in terms of what?
Like, is there another player that like a type of player on the floor that would make that combination work better for us? So having Trey and and DeJounte on the floor together, is that going to help us be a better team? Is there one more piece, or do we need to play a different style? Is there something that you see now that's going to make you the kind of team that you want to be?
Well, as far as another player, I mean that's always hard to say. Um, for those guys or in any particular instance, yeah, it's looking at, okay, why, when it is working on the court, like why is that successful? Why are we seeing positive results of that? What is it that you're doing? Those would be the things that for us, I think, tie back into a lot of our pillars. Like, one, what's the competitive spirit in that particular moment? Are we being unselfish? Are we moving the ball? Those things which, from a pass standpoint, you can measure. Like if things get sticky there, then yeah, that's tough. Now the development, to make it simple, is like, hey, you gotta continuously move the ball and keep the advantage for the group. And are you willing to do that? Are you not willing to do that? If you are, great, then we're gonna be better. If you're not, then okay, then we've reached a point, or we've reached a ceiling here.
Okay, well, think about my last question. Like, how confident do you feel in that, and the two of them working together?
Sorry, what was I'm sorry.
How confident do you feel that this is going to work out ultimately in the way that you envision?
I think that those guys are competitors. I think that at the end of the day, they want to do what they need to do to win. And I would bank on that. I'm very confident in that. If that changes, then you'll see changes.
Caleb Johnson.
Hey Landry, I wanted to ask you about AJ Griffin and how you view his value and his development, especially given the fact that he had a big rookie season and he's kind of come into this year, not really been a part of the rotation, and then hasn't gone down to the G League to get development in that way. So how are you viewing his value and his development process, as he hasn't necessarily really been playing?
Yeah. As everyone's well aware, AJ had some personal things that he needed to go through, or not needed to go through, but he went through this season. And it's unfortunate. And we wanted to first and foremost make sure that AJ the human, is okay. And when we brought him back and he got back into the fold, like there was, just because he hadn't been in College Park, let's say, it doesn't mean development wasn't happening. Like there's still things that we're doing pre-practice, during practice, post-practice, pre-game, and post-game and whatnot. At this point, you will see him be more in College Park, just as we're continuously laying out his development pathway. To bring it down a little bit more specifically on the defensive end, that's a growth area for AJ. Everyone knows he's an elite shooter, unbelievable shooter, for where he's at this stage of his career. But in order for him to continuously maximize himself and for us to be maximized, we're going to have to lean into the defensive aspect of his game. And that's where we're going to be focusing on now post-deadline.
And then just speaking on another player, Trent Forrest has obviously been a guy for you who was able to provide some depth, especially as you guys were hit with injuries. As you're reaching that part of his two-way deal where it could get a little complicated with the number of games that he's been a part of. How do you foresee his futures as part of this team and being a part of that two-way contract?
Yeah, it's currently a discussion right now on what it looks like for him in the future. And that's something that when the team gets back off the trip, we'll have that discussion with Quinn. We'll sit down and figure out what comes next for Trent.
Thanks.
Lauren Williams.
Hi again, Landry. Quinn has talked a lot about, the size that this team has had to face on a night in and night out basis, particularly when injuries have happened. I'm curious what your philosophy is moving forward regarding maybe adding some size to this roster.
Yeah, and the NBA, size and length is always going to be helpful. It's an important tool as it relates to just how good players are and just the sheer nature of the game of basketball. So it's definitely a focus of ours. It's part of our objectives for the future. But right now, obviously, we're not making any moves to upgrade in size. There's still things we can do, right? Where there's still chances to change your roster even post deadline, right? Like there's buyout markets, there's tons of things, but right now we're focused on our current group. But it is something that I agree with Quinn and we're aligned on. Like we know that that's something that for us we're going to have to make sure we're addressing in the future.
Yeah, that was my actual follow-up too. You talked about the buyout market, and I was curious how much you guys kind of evaluated what's out there and maybe what your thoughts are.
Well, it's that's always hard. Well, maybe I don't know. For us, it always is because you got guys that you have 15 guys on a roster. So if somebody's coming in, somebody's got to go out. And with whoever that may be, you know, like they've done things for us and they've integrated themselves into the group. And it's important for our culture and, you know, camaraderie. So you're always weighing that versus the player that does come in, and like, does the player that's coming in, are they solving particular objectives that we have? Are they achieving those objectives? And also, not only that, but is it somebody that we can ultimately grow into the future with? Will be things that we are filtering through as we make those considerations. There's nothing that we're doing right now, but we're keeping a pulse on that market for sure.
And then obviously you guys still have the trade player exception from the John Collins deal. I know you guys have a year to use that. So I'm just curious how you plan to kind of use that cap or that flexibility that created, just because we didn't get a chance to see you guys use it at the deadline this year.
Yeah, you know, for certain, yeah, the expiration date on that is important. I believe it's July 8th is when that would extinguish. So we do have some time for that. And it's an important tool. It's a helpful tool as we go into the summer, you know, post-draft, free agency, and when everything kind of comes back into where we have these opportunities to externally change our team.
Caleb Johnson.
Hey Landry, I know you said earlier that you didn't want to make any deals that would potentially be like short-sighted or for the now and not help you out in the future. The flip side of that, though, were there any thought into maybe we might have to make our team a little bit worse in the current mode in order to be better in the future? Is that not something that you were really interested in doing?
Making our team worse is language that I would never use around our office. I think that a competitive spirit is always going to be at play. And that's always going to be subjective too, right? Like maybe to you we got worse, but to me it's like, hey, we got better. I'm not interested at all in anything that's like tanking or like anything of that type of definition right now, because that's always a tricky thing. And I understand when teams have to do that, they have to do that. But I still think that there's this component of your how and your process. And again, the competitiveness that you need to operate by daily, regardless of the talent level that you have. So wasn't a thought for us in under that definition.
Ken.
Yeah, I try not to put words in your mouth, but when you say you're talking like you didn't want to make deals that were sacrificing long term for short term, and to me that sounds like we're playing more for 2025 26 than 24. Is that an accurate way of paraphrasing what you're saying?
You may have to say that a different way.
Sure. When you say that we weren't willing to sacrifice the long term for the short term, it sounds like we don't have as much, like we don't have as high aspirations for this season as we do for coming seasons.
I understand what you're saying. No. What I mean when I say long term or short term, I lean more into our values and expectations and things that we place a value on for us, where if like hypothetically speaking, if you have a player that comes in that has really tough intel, I guess you could say, but they're uber talented, like that's not gonna, that may help us in the short term, right? But the moment that starts to seep in and like that type of personality or character enters the mix, then that could have damages that go beyond just this season.
And what are they? Can you envision this team without Trey on it? Going not like in the future?
I haven't even sat here and thought about that. I'm focused on what we got.
All right. Thanks so much for your time today, Landry.
Appreciate it. Thanks everyone for your time.
Thank you, Landry.